Hello everybody, hope you're doing well. Chart and Rooster here and welcome to XDefiant. Now this is going to be a slightly different video than I planned because my voiceover when I recorded gameplay didn't work, so we're doing this after we've had a bit of time and played the game. Now I want to talk a bit about the game, and the main thing that drives this game is the different factions in the game itself. These are all Ubisoft factions, so you've got the cleaners from the Division. And these guys have a passive trait which gives them incendiary ammo, and they can activate things like the firebomb or incendiary drone, and then they have an ultra. Now every single one of the factions has two optional activated abilities, a passive ability and an ultra, so you can kind of customize this however you want. So we're just showing you some of these here at the beginning. Now one of the things I did notice is that some appear to be a lot more team orientated and some are definitely more personally orientated, shall we say. And for the first game that I tried, I wanted to use the Splinter Cell Echelon faction because of the low profile, which basically means that you don't show up on the minimap. You can also activate an intel suit which shows you where enemies are, and then there's an ultra which is you put on sick sonar goggles and you go around and you hunt people down with a pistol. I thought this was going to be quite an interesting playstyle to adopt to begin with, just to sort of see what the game was like. So I picked these guys and we jumped into our first match. Now all the games that you're going to see today are in the game's domination mode. I wanted to play something that was familiar so that I could get a sense for the game and how it was going to perform, and more importantly what it was going to feel like, and if it could live up to what a lot of people have been calling the Call of Duty killer. Now off the bat, I think labeling anything a Call of Duty killer is a mistake, because nothing's going to kill off Call of Duty. It's one of the largest franchises ever made. It's going to continue to have a lot of success. What I do like about the idea of this, though, is that it does push different studios to try and make something unique and slightly different in the genre, and I think Ubisoft have got something here. Now, as is what's about to be evident, this was my very first game in this game, so it was interesting to try and get used to it. I wasn't really sure what to expect, so picking this class, I thought maybe I was in for a bit of a shock for my playstyle. I don't normally play sort of sneaky beaky, sneaking around, and you'll see me kind of failing to use a lot of my abilities as I'm sort of getting used to it. The one thing I will say immediately is that the UI, I'm going to have a look into the settings and see if I can tone that down, because for me that's a lot in my face all at once. We've got our first kill ever, there we go, using the MP5 for close range engagements, and trying to sneak around with that minimap ability and pinging. I'm using the sonar here so you can actually see little highlights. It's basically a little wall hack that you get as part of this faction, which is kind of interesting. And what I do think is that Ubisoft, as I say, have got something here. It's got quite an interesting recipe to be quite successful. It feels casual and it doesn't feel too sweaty. Now this could just be because these are the early days of this game. It could get more sweaty as people start getting more familiar with the mechanics and the way that things feel. As you can see, I haven't quite figured out the way that the MP5 feels, but you know, it is kind of an interesting take on the hero shooter genre. It's not really about the individual characters, it's more about the factions that you are selecting that are really going to make a difference. If your team picks 5 operators in the same faction, you're probably going to lose. You're going to want a mix of a faction like Echelon that, you know, highlights people and does a bit of recon and shows you where they are. You want people like the cleaners because they do massive DPS damage and they're really good for pushing into points. There are factions that are focused on healing, where you can put down little medical stations and medical pills and things like that as well. You've got the faction from Ghost Recon, the Phantoms, that are really strong at holding points because they've got shields that they can equip and put down. So you do get this nice mix of classes in a shooter like this. So I guess maybe it is more focusing on a class-based system rather than a hero shooter system, which is very similar to Battlefield, which is kind of interesting to have factions, you know, being classes in a game like this. I'm trying to work out the movement a little bit here. At times it did feel a little bit floaty. It felt like my mouse and keyboard weren't connected to the character that was running around us, and it had a little bit of a floatiness to it, and I suppose this is things that will eventually calm down as the game gets patches and hopefully Ubisoft start looking at feedback. I do think it is such an interesting concept of taking your major franchises and turning them into an FPS, and it is a free-to-play game. So I think what I'm thinking about there is that, you know, because it's free to play, you probably will judge it to a different standard to, say, Call of Duty, which is, you know, $60, $70 every time it comes out, and it's more or less the same thing over and over again, right? With some slight tweaks here and there. I don't know if this game is going to have long-term staying power, is the one thing I felt when I was playing. I felt, yeah, this could feel like quite a good casual shooter to pick up maybe a couple of hours at the weekends or something. It could be fun to run around and get used to the game a bit more, but I don't see myself spending, you know, 20, 30, 40, 50, 100 hours in this game. I do think I overall had a really good time with it. Now, speaking of the good time I was having with this game, let me introduce you to my favourite weapon that I used in my time playing, the M249. Now, this thing is an absolute beast. I wasn't expecting to do as well with this as I did, but something about it, look at that. You can just click and hold mouse 1 to win with this gun. It is really, really, really fun. And I think finding weapons that you click with that you really enjoy is a fun part of this game. There isn't a huge number of weapons in the game. There are the usual categories. You've got your assault rifles, SMGs, LMGs, sniper rifle, shotgun, marksman. I think maybe 10-ish weapons at the moment. I assume that's Ubisoft putting it up there so that they can add weapons in battle passes and things like that, and that's where I think this game is going to get its money. As a free-to-play game, that's its main source of income. My only hope with that is that they don't lock things behind paywalls, don't lock weapons in battle passes that you can only get if you get the battle pass, but it's Ubisoft, so who really knows? This is kind of interesting territory. I'm trying to think of other FPS Ubisoft games that aren't like single player or co-op. I'm kind of struggling to come up with any. Ghost Recon, I suppose, back in the day. But it is interesting to have a shooter from them, and I loved using the M249. It reminded me of Battlefield. I know that's kind of weird in the context of this kind of game, but it did. I'm playing as a class. I've got an LMG. I'm actually playing as the medic class here, which is, you know, I decided that in this match I was going to try and play as an old school Battlefield medic when the medics used to have LMGs, so I whapped out the M249 and I had a bit of fun as this class. I didn't really enjoy playing as the medic because the deployable health thing that you get, it's few and far between. I understand that's a balance thing, but I really liked using this gun, as you can see from this absolute devastation of me holding mouse 1 to win. It definitely feels there's a lot more depth here than there is on the surface. It feels like weapons have specialist ranges, and that's something that is actually quite important in getting this nice balance in a game like this. Have something simple that draws people in, and then add your complexities with weapons that are good at different ranges. Find out the combinations of weapon and faction that work perfectly together so that you can have the most fun you can with the things that you enjoy. You know, there is freedom in this because you can pick any weapon for every faction. You get to pick between different activated abilities, which is really cool. And I really love levels of customization in games like this because you want to get involved. You can just pick this up and play it, but if you want to learn the intricacies, you could spend a bit of time here. As I say, it might not be a long-term game, but it is a game I'd recommend you test out. It's free to play. You've literally got nothing to lose but disk space at this point. We will see if Ubisoft do go down a pay-to-win route, if they've got a battle pass that has weapons locked behind it and you have to pay, but we'll see. We'll cross that bridge when we come to it, but my initial impressions generally about this game were fairly positive. Now, whilst it was an overall positive experience, I do think it's important for me to have a think now in retrospect of some of the negatives I felt. First of all was the appearance of the characters. Now, what I mean by that is that it did feel like you were fighting clones, and sometimes those characters were on your team and sometimes they were on the other team. Now, I think it is quite identifiable. You've got big blue triangles above people's heads if they're on your team, and you've got, you know, red nameplates on the other team. But I think it was at times a little bit confusing. I think it would have been interesting if Ubisoft had gone down an asymmetric route and maybe had the good guys and the bad guys be different factions or just appear differently. That was the thing with Titanfall, is that the way that other characters look to you depended on which faction you chose, if I remember rightly. So I think it would have been interesting if you have got a good team, quote-unquote good team, and a quote-unquote bad team, that maybe you've got the rebels from a Far Cry game against the oppressors of a Far Cry game. You've maybe got the opposing factions from Splinter Cell. You've maybe got, you know, the cleaners are a really good example of this. You could have division agents in here. I think once more customization is released for the game, it'll maybe feel less like you're fighting clones and you're fighting with clones and be a little bit disorientating, but I do think that was one thing that I did notice. It might be because I want things to be more generic. It's always that Battlefield 3 and 4 player in me that wants people to look like generic soldiers. But, you know, it is what it is for now, and maybe we'll see some improvements in there as well. The next negative for me really was sound design. I found it was quite inconsistent with footsteps. Sometimes I could really hear people, sometimes I just couldn't hear anything. The guns seem okay. I wouldn't say there's anything incredible in the sound design of the weaponry or the explosions or anything, but it's good enough for what it is. You know, don't expect to sit and listen for footsteps. This is terrible, this fight, by the way. This is the worst fight I think I've ever had in my life. But don't expect to hear footsteps all the time. I think that was quite challenging. There's a lot of sounds going on. It's similar to what I was saying about the UI being quite a lot. There's quite a lot of sound effects constantly going on, so you kind of have to dial in your ears. You kind of have to listen out for very specific things that are actually useful and disregard some of the generic sound effects and sort of bump that's going on in the background. So to sort of sum things up and round things out for me here in this video today, I think my first impression of the game was generally positive. I think there is potential with the game. There is also the potential that this goes horribly wrong, especially as a free-to-play game. Sometimes that can be a curse on a lot of games. I think that it's worth you trying out because it's free. Don't expect to be blown away by the sound design. The visuals are pretty good and the map design's interesting, I think, but I think it's fun to have a game that's an arena shooter that isn't Halo and isn't Call of Duty. It's kind of fun to have something like that. I will at some point probably get into ranked and see the difference, because I'm playing in the casual matches here, and kind of see the difference between casual and ranked to see if that game, maybe you care a bit more about winning and losing, but I think it's a nice casual experience at the moment. The matches aren't too long. It's very much pick up and play. So I would recommend the game as something to try out if you're looking for a slightly different arena shooter. And let me know what you think in the comments below. Have you tried this? Let me know below. If you have tried it, what do you think? Do you like it? Are you in the same boat as me in that there is potential here? It might not be, you know, a Call of Duty killer, but I think quite frankly nothing ever will be, but it is a fun little shooter to play, and I would recommend playing it. Thank you guys so much for watching and listening. If you've made it this far, I really do appreciate it. Give me a like if you've enjoyed yourself. Leave me a comment below on your thoughts on the game. Subscribe if you want to see more from me. I'll be doing more shooters, action, multiplayer, and some surprises that are on the way in the next few months. Thank you guys for watching. Enjoy the rest of your day.